Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're about to unpack something that, well, for many of us, often feels a world away. The daily workings of the United States Congress.
Yeah, it can seem pretty distant.
But trust us, the decisions made on Capitol Hill profoundly impact your community, your wallet, and your future.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to, cut through the noise and dive straight into the Congressional Record from June 17th, 2025.
Just one day's record.
Just one day. But we'll be extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge and, honestly, some truly surprising insights from what was a really bustling day in Washington. The goal is to connect the dots between the legislative highlights, the key debates, moments of reflection, and show you what it all means for everyday Americans.
And what a day it was. It really showcases the immense breadth of issues Congress grapples with daily. I mean, everything from new bills on artists' rights and offshore minerals to these really intense debates over the budget and, well, war powers.
Plus those moments of remembrance, community efforts, it's all in there.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. So what kind of ideas were sparking new legislation on this particular day? A lot of the work starts quietly, right? With new bills just being introduced.
Exactly. And the range, as you said, it's pretty astonishing on any given day.
Like in the House, we saw H.R. 4017. This was introduced by Mr. Nadler and Mrs. Chu.
Right.
And it aims to amend copyright law, specifically to secure the rights of visual artists. It even provides for something called resale royalties.
Yeah, that's fascinating, the resale royalties bit. It means artists could potentially get a percentage every time their work is resold. Even years later. Decades later, potentially. It's about ensuring they benefit from the long-term value, the increasing value of their work. What's truly striking, listeners, how these bills show Congress isn't just debating huge policy. They're also fine-tuning the fabric of our culture, our commerce, like protecting artists' income or defining national resources.
Absolutely. And right alongside that arts bill, you had Mr. Ezel and Mrs. Miller-Meeks introducing H.R. 4018. A bill titled To Unleash America's Offshore Critical Minerals and Resources. So very different focus there.
Completely different. National resources, energy independence, the economy. That's the angle there.
Then there's H.R. 4021 from Mr. Brickey and others. This one proposes to prohibit certain federal activities related to promoting LGBTQ plus Pride Month.
Yes.
And the display of related flags on federal property.
Yeah.
So that one steps right into some significant social and cultural debates.
It definitely does. And we're just reporting the content of the bill itself here, of course.
Right. And then completely different again, Mr. Faney introduced H.R. 4033. This one amends the Endangered Species Act, specifically for sturgeon.
Sturgeon? Really?
Yeah, to allow certain activities with sturgeon held in captivity or controlled environments. So very niche, but clearly critical for some environmental policy areas.
Shows the level of detail they get into. Now, over in the Senate, Senator Durbin introduced S. 2093.
Okay, what's that one about?
This proposes a program within USAID, that's the Agency for International Development, to promote mobility in rural communities globally.
Mobility. How?
Through access to affordable, fit-for-purpose bicycles.
Bicycles. Interesting.
Yeah. It's a take on sustainable development, international aid, focusing on basic transportation to help people access critical services. Simple idea, potentially big impact.
And also in the Senate.
We saw S. 2099 from Mr. Paul, and the title is very direct, A Bill to Repeal the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936.
Okay, Robinson-Patman Act.
Yeah.
For those of us, myself included, who aren't antitrust lawyers, what would repealing that actually mean?
Well, it's a pretty major piece of antitrust law. It was designed, essentially, to prevent certain kinds of price discrimination.
So charging different prices to different buyers.
Sorts of, yeah. Preventing large buyers from getting unfairly low prices that smaller competitors couldn't access. Repealing it, well, that could have really significant implications for competition, for business practices, across lots of industries.
Reshaping how companies deal with suppliers, customers.
Exactly. It's a long-standing debate, really, about how much the government should regulate market behavior. These new bills, they show emerging priorities, or sometimes, like with Robinson-Patman, old debates bubbling up again.
Okay, so while new bills show ideas percolating, the real fireworks, they often happen around fiercely debated existing stuff or proposed legislation.
Oh, absolutely.
And listener, the budget battle we saw unfolding this week, I mean, that's a classic example. High-stakes political maneuvering.
Definitely. You had Republicans pushing for what one senator described as common sense reforms to protect and strengthen Medicaid.
For those who need it the most. That was the framing.
Right. They're focused on reining in federal spending, particularly to states that direct money to undocumented immigrants.
Okay.
They also want to bring in work requirements for able-bodied adults getting health care.
Right. That's been a recurring theme.
And overturn what they term Biden-era regulations that they say made it harder to remove ineligible people from programs like Medicaid.
Yeah.
And they're really zeroing in on this provider tax loophole.
A provider tax loophole. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Sure. Essentially, it refers to a practice where some states might inflate the prices they report for Medicaid services
Why would he do that?
to collect larger reimbursements from the federal government. Republicans argue that because of this, taxpayers are now on the hook, as they put it, for tens of billions of dollars in extra spending.
Wow. Okay.
So their overall push is framed as, safeguarding the program's integrity and taxpayer money.
But, as you'd expect, Democrats have a very different take.
Yeah.
A really sharp perspective, actually.
Extremely different.
One senator famously called the Republican proposal Donald Trump's big ugly bill,
Yeah, strong language.
describing the Senate Finance Committee's version as even worse than expected compared to the House bill.
Their claim is that it would lead to, and this is a quote, the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. They're warning it could strip 16 or maybe even 17 million people of their health insurance.
16 or 17 million, that's huge.
It's a massive number. And they're not stopping there. They also assert it's a death sentence for clean energy.
Why? What's the connection?
Because the proposal apparently phases out tax credits for wind and solar projects within just 6 months.
6 months, that's fast.
Very fast. And they predict this would cause electric bills to soar, lead to maybe 850,000 job losses,
Wow.
and effectively surrender U.S. energy independence to China. That's their argument.
So the fundamental critique is
That the bill is basically tax cuts for billionaires paid for by working families. They called it a billionaire boondoggle and a bludgeoning of our health, our economy, our future, really pulling no punches.
so this budget fight,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about the policy details, is it?
Wow.
It seems deeply tied to the legislative process itself. We're hearing terms like reconciliation and the bird rule thrown around.
Precisely. And this stuff gets complicated, but it's important. Imagine a special fast-track lane in Congress called reconciliation.
Okay, fast track.
It was set up back in 1974, and the original idea was specific. Make it easier to pass bills that reduce the national debt. That's key. Reduce the debt.
And it bypasses the filibuster.
That's the crucial part. It's one of the rare instances where a filibuster can't block a bill in the Senate. Now, the Byrd rule, named after Senator Robert Byrd, that's supposed to be the guardrail.
The guardrail.
Yeah, to make sure only genuinely budget-related items can use this special fast lane. But there's a growing concern now
Concern about what?
that this reconciliation process is being used, or maybe misused, to push through policies that aren't strictly about the budget, or worse, policies that actually increase the deficit while still avoiding the filibuster.
So it's like finding a loophole to avoid what would normally be a much harder legislative fight.
That's the accusation, essentially. Historically, there was a big shift in 1996 when reconciliation was, as some say, repurposed for a tax bill that actually increased the deficit. And just for context, our current annual deficit is running at about 6% of our gross domestic product. That's a pretty stark contrast to the surplus we saw near the end of the Clinton administration.
So the big question this raises is,
Well, what are the long-term implications for, fiscal integrity, for the stability of our national finances, when these really critical budget rules are debated and potentially bent or altered in such fundamental ways?
yeah, it's not just about this one bill, but the rules of the game.
Exactly. It's about the foundation of how Congress manages the nation's finances.
Okay, another huge debate that flared up involves war powers
Yeah.
and executive authority, specifically regarding Iran,
Right. A war powers resolution was filed.
which sets up a potential Senate floor vote in, about a week and a half.
That's the timeline, yes.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these debates really highlight the fundamental checks and balances.
One's designed into our system.
Exactly, and how they're constantly being tested by, evolving global realities and shifting domestic priorities.
One speaker, who sounded like Senator Kaine, based on the arguments,
Yes, implicitly Senator Kaine.
really emphasized the framers' original intent, how they deliberately split war powers.
Right. Congress declares war, that's Article 1. The president was commander-in-chief, Article 2.
But the key distinction he made.
Was between defense and offense. A president can defend the nation if attacked without waiting for Congress. But going on offense, initiating a war, that requires explicit authorization from Congress. He even referenced James Madison from 1798 on this point.
And the resolution itself, what are its criteria?
It requires two things, basically. First, that hostilities are underway or imminent. And second, that there's no existing congressional authorization for war against Iran specifically.
He also made a point of clarifying support for Israel, didn't he?
Yes, very clearly. Strong support for Israel's right to self-defense, mentioning the U.S. aid provided, like the supplemental bill back in April after the Hamas attack. But he stressed, that's quote, a different question than whether the United States should go to war with Iran. And stated flatly, there's no compelling security reason for the United States to go to war with Iran.
He pushed for diplomacy instead.
Very much so. Referencing the eagle on the U.S. seal, how it faces the olive branch, symbolizing a preference for peace. And he brought up the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA.
Right, the deal the U.S. later withdrew from.
Exactly. He noted that under the deal, Iran had reaffirmed that it would never seek to purchase, acquire, or develop nuclear weapons, and agreed to what he called the most comprehensive inspection regime ever negotiated.
And his point about withdrawal.
He argued that even top officials in the Trump administration, like Defense Secretary Mattis, Secretary of State Tillerson, National Security Advisor McMaster, had advised against withdrawing.
Why?
Because, as one of them apparently put it, it is working. His argument was that tearing up that deal led directly to the current dangers we face.
And beyond the strategic arguments, there was a moral dimension, too.
Oh, absolutely. A really powerful point about Congress's duty. The idea that Congress must have a public debate and vote before sending troops into harm's way.
He said, how dare we ask people to make the ultimate sacrifice if we don't have the guts to have a debate?
And decide whether a war is in the interest of this country. It's a gut punch question, really, about congressional courage and accountability.
And he connected this to public opinion.
Yeah, citing a recent poll showing only, 16% of Americans think the U.S. military should get involved in a wider conflict with Iran, while 60% say we should not. So a call for Congress to reflect that sentiment, or at least debate it openly.
Okay, so beyond these huge headline-grabbing debates, a ton of important background work happens in Congress, stuff that often goes unnoticed but is crucial.
Absolutely. Committees, nominations,
right.
The gears of government turning.
Right, like the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on June 17th. The focus, the Biden presidency and the Constitution.
Yes, co-chaired by Senator Cornyn and Senator Eric Schmidt. The stated aim was to delve into the constitutional implications of President Biden's cognitive decline while in office.
That's politically charged.
It certainly is. They said the hearing would begin to address some of the many unanswered questions from this scandal, and this ties directly into the 25th Amendment.
The 25th Amendment. Remind us of its significance here.
It deals with presidential disability and succession. It was put in place after JFK's assassination, ratified in '67, to clarify what happens if a president becomes, quote, incapable of performing his or her constitutional duties.
And the relevant part.
Section 4. It outlines a process where the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president unable to serve. The hearing explicitly raised questions about accountability. What happens if the cabinet and VP are perceived to fail in that duty? It's a stark reminder that our constitutional framework anticipates these tough situations, but its actual execution, well, it relies heavily on the good faith, as they put it, of the people involved, the VP and the cabinet members.
And then there are nominations. Less drama, maybe, but still vital. Like the Senate, considering Olivia Trustee for the FCC.
Right, Olivia Trustee of Maryland, nominated to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission. It was actually a reappointment for a 5-year term starting July 1st, 2025.
And vote.
The Senate voted to invoke cloture. That's a procedural step to end debate. It passed 53 yeas to 44 nays.
So that clears the way for a final confirmation vote.
Exactly. And these nomination votes, they might not make front-page news, but they're critical. They determine who fills these powerful roles in government agencies, the people who shape policy and regulations that affect communications, media, the internet.
And the committee hearings, like the judiciary one, play a role in vetting these people, too.
Absolutely. Committee hearings are crucial for oversight, for accountability, for making sure the right people, or at least thoroughly vetted people, are put into these important positions.
Okay, now, in really stark contrast to some of those heated debates and, frankly, the political nature of that hearing. Congress also takes time for something else. Acknowledging national moments, celebrating communities.
Yes, and sometimes finding moments of unity. These can be really powerful reminders that even amidst intense political differences, there's shared humanity. Moments of crisis can sometimes bring leaders together.
We saw that tragically with the events in Minnesota.
Yes, profoundly impactful. Following the horrifying shootings of 2 Minnesota state lawmakers and their spouses, Senator Thune expressed horror. The murder of State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and the serious wounding of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette.
And another Minnesota senator, presumably Senator Klobuchar, gave a very moving tribute.
She did. Spoke about Melissa Hortman's legacy. Things like free school lunches, paid leave, voting rights, clean energy initiatives she championed.
But the part that really stood out
Was her emphasis that the entire Minnesota delegation, Democrats and Republicans, condemned the violence with one voice.
a unified voice.
Yes. And she made this passionate call for people to, quote, turn down the rhetoric, to treat each other with decency and respect, to act a little more like Melissa and Mark.
Oh.
She even shared a message from Hortman's children, asking people simply to come together, hold your loved ones a little closer, love your neighbors, treat each other with kindness and respect. It really hit home, the human cost of division and violent rhetoric.
A very poignant moment. And the Senate also paused for another somber remembrance, didn't it?
It did. Senate Resolution 282 was agreed to. It commemorated June 17, 2025, as the 10th anniversary of the shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston.
Emanuel 9.
The Emanuel 9, killed by Dylan Roof, a white supremacist. The resolution described it as an atrocity that changed the landscape and, frankly, the hearts of our entire state and nation. And it specifically highlighted the incredible act of forgiveness shown by the victims' families.
Such a powerful example of grace in the face of unimaginable hate.
Truly.
There was also a resolution looking ahead, SRES 283, about the Dalai Lama.
Yes, introduced to commemorate his upcoming 90th birthday on July 6, 2025, designating it as a Day of Compassion.
And the substance of it.
It expresses support for the human rights and the distinct religious, cultural, linguistic, and historical identity of the Tibetan people. And critically, it reiterates U.S. policy,
Which is?
that the identification and installation of Tibetan Buddhist leaders, including a future 15th Dalai Lama, is purely a matter for the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan Buddhist community themselves.
Not the Chinese government.
Explicitly not the government of the People's Republic of China. It cites the Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2020 on that.
Okay. And other tributes. Distinguished Americans, specific initiatives.
Yes, a few more. Senate Resolution 286 recognized the life and public service of former First Lady Barbara Pierce Bush on what would have been her 100th birthday.
A nice recognition.
And in the House, Representative Green of Texas celebrated the 160th anniversary of Juneteenth. He highlighted Galveston as its birthplace and noted that H.R. 1320 became law on June 17, 2021, making Juneteenth the first new federal holiday in nearly 4 decades.
Important historical markers.
Definitely. And then these really interesting community spotlights. Representative Bill Arakis from Florida talked about the Light Up Navajo project.
Light Up Navajo.
Yeah, employees from an electric cooperative in Florida with Lacucci River Electric traveled over 1,800 miles
Wow.
to bring electricity to Navajo families in Arizona and New Mexico. Families who had lived without power for generations. They energized 10 homesteads.
That's incredible. Generations without power. It really shows how congressional action, or even just highlighting these efforts, can connect to fundamental human needs.
It really does. And similarly, Representative Case from Hawaii discussed energy resilience in remote and tribal areas.
Like Hawaii's own goals.
Exactly. Hawaii's goal for 100% renewable electricity by 2045. He mentioned a Department of Energy program, ETIP, the Energy Transitions Initiative program.
What does it do?
It partners with over 25 tribal, coastal, remote, and island communities, helping them get reliable, affordable energy and become more resilient using things like microgrids.
So, looking at all these resolutions and tributes, what's the takeaway?
I think it shows that beyond the big debates, beyond the partisan fighting, Congress also takes time to, mark national moments, celebrate community achievements, address very specific, sometimes local needs. It reminds us of the diverse roles it plays, often quite personal ones.
Okay, let's bring it right home now. How do all these congressional activities, the bills, the debates, the resolutions, how do they connect directly to your daily life, listener?
That's the crucial question.
One really interesting example is this tension around local governance. Representative McCollum from Minnesota. She spoke out against several bills, H.R. 884, H.R. 2056, H.R. 2096.
Right, and what was the issue with those bills?
They aim to have Congress essentially rule on specific local ordinances or funding decisions for the District of Columbia.
Ah, the perennial D.C. home rule debate.
Exactly. Her argument was straightforward. Congress should not be stripping away local self-governance from D.C. residents. She said, "We aren't sent here to rule on specific local ordinances or funding decisions made by the cities and counties in any of our districts."
So this really raises that important question, doesn't it? How do we balance national interests, or at least Congress's interest, with the unique needs and rights of local communities?
Federal versus local control. How much autonomy should cities and communities have? It's a fundamental tension.
It is. And Representative McCollum also took aim at another bill, H.R. 4, the Rescissions Act of 2025.
Rescissions meaning taking back funding.
Yes, cutting previously appropriated funds. She called this bill an unprecedented attack on public media.
Public media, like PBS and NPR.
Presumably, yes. Her argument was that public media gets a tiny fraction of federal spending, less than 0.01%, she said, about $1.60 per taxpayer.
That doesn't sound like much.
It isn't, relatively speaking. But she argued it provides essential services, nonpartisan news, educational programming, vital emergency alerts, especially crucial in rural areas that might otherwise become news deserts.
So losing that funding could have a big impact, especially locally.
That was her point. It highlights how federal funding decisions, even seemingly small ones, can affect essential public services and access to information right there in your community.
So these seemingly unrelated things, D.C. home rule, public media funding, those energy projects we talked about.
They all kind of connect, don't they? They're all about the distribution of power and resources. Who decides? Washington or the local community, and those decisions directly affect individuals and communities. It's that constant push and pull.
Federal oversight versus local autonomy.
Right, with real consequences for how you get your news, how your town is powered, how your local government functions. Knowledge, as they say. It's most valuable when you understand it and can see how it applies.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, wow, we covered a lot from just one day.
We really did.
We've seen the sheer range of new ideas popping up in legislation, those fierce debates over the budget, over war powers, the critical background role of committee oversight and nominations, and that very human side of Congress, too, the moments of remembrance, recognition, community focus.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? Congress isn't just this abstract machine churning out bills and votes. It's a living, breathing reflection, sometimes messy, sometimes inspiring, of our national priorities, our challenges, and yeah, our values, too.
It truly is a dynamic arena where these things are constantly shaped and debated.
Often in ways that ripple directly into your life, listener, even if the specific bill number never makes headlines.
And your role in this living democracy, it's key. We really encourage you to stay informed.
Absolutely.
You can find and read the bills we talked about today. You can track upcoming hearings or votes. Resources like congress.gov are invaluable for that.
Congress.gov, definitely check it out.
And remember, your representatives, your member of Congress, your senators, they're there to represent your interests. Don't hesitate to reach out to them. Let them know what you think.
Your voice does matter in that process.
So here's a final thought to ponder. It's something to mull over beyond this deep dive. Considering those contrasting views on power, we discussed federal reach versus local control, and thinking about the profound impact of rhetoric, both unifying and dividing. How can your individual voice, your engagement, best shape the ongoing debates that define our nation?
That's a great question to leave folks with.
Join us next time on The Deep Dive.